Ms. Holloway, are you quite sure you're prepared to represent yourself in a case of this complexity? This isn't traffic court, you know. Judge Alistair Thorne boomed, his voice dripping with condescension as he peered down from his elevated bench. Evelyn Holloway, 38, small and unassuming in a simple dark suit, merely adjusted her glasses. "I am, Your Honor," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. The courtroom snickered. The opposing counsel, a renowned legal shark, smirked. Thorne leaned back, clearly anticipating an easy morning of entertainment at her expense. He had no idea he was about to witness a masterclass that would leave him and the entire courtroom utterly speechless. If you believe brilliance often comes in quiet packages, type underestimated below. Evelyn Holloway was not what one typically pictured when imagining a courtroom adversary. She was petite, with a gentle demeanor, her dark hair usually pulled back in a simple bun, her attire professional but understated, a stark contrast to the power suits and theatrical aggression favored by many in her field. She preferred quiet preparation over courtroom histrionics, meticulous research over bluster. For 15 years she had worked as a legal researcher and brief writer for some of the city's most high-powered law firms, the unseen engine behind many landmark victories. Her brilliance was in the details, in the elegant construction of irrefutable arguments, in finding the obscure precedent that could turn a case on its head. She rarely sought the spotlight, content to contribute from the shadows. But today, she stood alone at the plaintiff's table in Judge Thorne's notoriously intimidating courtroom. She was representing herself in a complex intellectual property dispute against Omnicorp, a corporate behemoth represented by the formidable Atticus Finch, a lawyer whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his win record. Evelyn wasn't an intellectual property specialist by trade, but the case was personal. Omnicorp had, she alleged, stolen a revolutionary software algorithm she had developed years ago in her spare time, an algorithm that could have democratized access to complex data analysis. She'd tried to negotiate, to reason, but Omnicorp's legal team had dismissed her claims with contempt, assuming the quiet researcher would never dare challenge them in court. They and Judge Thorne were about to learn otherwise. Judge Alistair Thorne was a relic from a bygone era of judicial imperiousness. He enjoyed the power of his position, relished intimidating young lawyers, and had a particular disdain for anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of a proper legal mind, which usually meant anyone who wasn't a loud, aggressive older man like himself. He'd glanced at the case file, self-represented plaintiff, complex corporate litigation. He'd already decided this would be a quick, amusing dismissal. "Very well, Ms. Holloway," Judge Thorne said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Since you are so confident, you may proceed with your opening statement. Try to keep it coherent, if you please. Mr. Finch," he nodded towards the Omnicorp lawyer, "has actual billable hours to consider." The courtroom filled with junior lawyers and curious onlookers, eager to see Finch in action, and perhaps a pro-se litigant crash and burn, tittered with amusement. Finch himself offered a condescending smile. Evelyn ignored them all. She approached the lectern, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't carry a mountain of files, just a slim, neatly organized binder and a single flash drive. "Your Honor, members of the court," she began, her voice quiet but clear, carrying surprisingly well in the large room. "This case is not about complex legal theories, though we will certainly address them. At its heart, it is about a simple truth: theft. Omnicorp, through deliberate and documented actions, misappropriated a unique and valuable piece of intellectual property, an algorithm I designed, coded, and copyrighted, and has since profited immensely from its unauthorized use." Finch snorted audibly. Evelyn continued, unfazed. "Over the next few days I will present evidence that demonstrates, beyond any reasonable doubt, Omnicorp's access to my proprietary code, the striking similarities between their innovative software and my original algorithm, and the clear timeline of their infringement." Her opening was concise, devoid of jargon, laying out her case with a quiet precision that was a stark contrast to Finch's usual bombastic style. Judge Thorne looked bored, already mentally drafting his dismissal ruling. He interrupted her. "Ms. Holloway, while your narrative is touching, do you have any actual legal basis for this claim? Or is this just a matter of sour grapes, Because Omnicorp developed something similar to an idea you once had? The implication was clear. She was an amateur, out of her depth. Evelyn met the judge's gaze directly, her quiet demeanor unwavering. Your Honor, my legal basis rests on established copyright law, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, and on clear precedents regarding trade secret misappropriation and unjust enrichment. I will also be demonstrating a clear breach of a non-disclosure agreement signed by an Omnicorp executive during early exploratory discussions regarding my algorithm. An NDA Mr. Finch's team seems to have conveniently overlooked in their discovery. Finch suddenly looked less amused, his head snapping up. He shot a sharp glance at his junior associate, who began frantically rifling through papers. Judge Thorne raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise breaking through his bored facade. An NDA, you say? Mr. Finch, were you aware of this alleged agreement? Finch stood, his voice smooth, but with a new note of caution. Your Honor, we have no record of any valid or relevant non-disclosure agreement pertaining to this plaintiff. Perhaps Ms. Holloway is mistaken about the party or the context. I am not mistaken, Your Honor, Evelyn stated calmly, and I have the digitally signed original time-stamped with verifiable metadata, which I will be presenting as Exhibit A. She inserted the flash drive into the court's AV system. With a few clicks, a perfectly preserved, digitally authenticated non-disclosure agreement appeared on the courtroom monitors, clearly bearing the signature of Omnicorp's Chief Technology Officer and detailing the precise nature of Evelyn's algorithm. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Thorne leaned forward, peering at the screen, his earlier smirk gone. Finch looked apoplectic, whispering furiously to his associate. This wasn't the amateur hour he'd anticipated. Evelyn then proceeded with meticulous, almost surgical precision to lay out her case. She didn't raise her voice, didn't resort to theatrics. Instead, she presented a devastatingly clear and logical sequence of evidence. She showed her original copyrighted code, side by side with Omnicorp's supposedly proprietary software, highlighting lines of code that were not just similar, but identical, including her own unique, slightly idiosyncratic commenting style. She presented internal Omnicorp emails, obtained through a surprisingly astute pre-trial discovery request she had filed herself, which Finch's team had clearly underestimated, showing developers discussing her algorithm after the NDA was signed and before their product launch. She cross-referenced dates, server logs, access permissions, weaving a tight, irrefutable net of evidence. As Evelyn presented her evidence, the atmosphere in the courtroom transformed. The snickers died away, replaced by murmurs of surprise, then grudging respect. Junior lawyers who had come to watch Finch demolish a pro se litigant were now furiously taking notes, witnessing a masterclass in preparation and understated legal warfare. Finch, usually so dominant, found himself repeatedly on the back foot, his objections often overruled by an increasingly intrigued Judge Thorne, his bluster deflating with each new piece of meticulously presented evidence. Evelyn remained calm throughout, her voice never rising, her demeanor consistently respectful, even as she systematically dismantled Omnicorp's defense. When it was Finch's turn to cross-examine, he attempted his usual tactics: intimidation, condescension, trying to trip her up on obscure legal technicalities. But Evelyn was unflappable. She answered his questions with quiet precision, often turning his own aggressive phrasing back on him with a devastatingly polite counter-question that highlighted the flaws in his logic. She knew her case inside out, not just the broad strokes, but every minute detail, every potential weakness, every relevant precedent. She wasn't just a researcher who had stumbled into court. She was a brilliant legal mind who had simply chosen, until now, to operate behind the scenes. Judge Thorne, who had started the day expecting to make short work of Evelyn Holloway, was now leaning forward, completely engrossed, a look of stunned disbelief slowly morphing into something akin to awe. He'd seen thousands of lawyers in his courtroom, from raw novices to seasoned titans. He had never seen anyone, pro se or represented by a dozen partners, so thoroughly, so quietly, and so devastatingly dominate a case against such formidable opposition. He'd intended to embarrass her, to teach her a lesson about the realities of the courtroom. Instead, Evelyn Holloway was teaching him. On the third day, after Evelyn presented her final piece of evidence, a damning internal memo from Omnicorp's CTO explicitly stating, "Holloway's algorithm is the key. Acquire it or replicate it discreetly." Atticus Finch, for the first time in his storied career, looked utterly defeated. He requested a recess. When court resumed, Finch, his face ashen, informed Judge Thorne that Omnicorp wished to enter into immediate settlement negotiations with Ms. Holloway. The courtroom buzzed. A settlement offered by Omnicorp before Finch had even presented his full defense was a clear admission of defeat. Judge Thorne, still looking somewhat stunned, granted the recess for negotiations. Evelyn Holloway, her expression calm and composed as ever, simply nodded and gathered her slim binder. Later that afternoon, a settlement was announced. While the terms were confidential, rumors quickly spread through the legal community that Omnicorp had paid a figure in the high eight figures, along with a public acknowledgement of Evelyn's foundational work and ongoing royalties. Evelyn Holloway, the quiet researcher who had represented herself, had gone up against a corporate giant and its star litigator and had won decisively. As Judge Thorne officially entered the settlement into the record, effectively closing the case, he looked down at Evelyn Holloway, no longer with condescension, but with a profound, almost reverential respect. "Ms. Holloway," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier booming arrogance, now quiet and sincere, "in my 30 years on this bench, I have rarely witnessed such a display of legal acuity, meticulous preparation, and quiet fortitude. You came into this courtroom underestimated by all, including, I confess, myself. You leave it having demonstrated a level of brilliance that many seasoned attorneys could only aspire to. You have not only ably represented your own interests, but you have also served as a stark reminder to us all that true legal talent is not measured in volume or bluster, but in intellect, diligence, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. This court stands corrected and deeply impressed." Evelyn Holloway simply offered a small, polite smile. "Thank you, Your Honor." She then turned and walked out of the courtroom, not with triumph, but with the same quiet dignity with which she had entered, leaving behind a stunned legal team, a humbled judge, and a courtroom full of people who had just learned a powerful lesson. Never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. They are often the most formidable, because true brilliance doesn't need to shout, it simply needs to be heard. And sometimes, the most powerful statements are made in the most understated voice. Subscribe to my channel if you believe in the power of quiet intelligence, and that substance will always outshine swagger.